it play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to this week's Sit and Talk. I will be your host today, answering your questions that you posted last week. Next week, our hosts will be Josh and Lee. So if you'd like to leave them questions pretty much about anything, this is an Ask Me Anything show after all, then you can do so in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, then there's a link in the description to leave it on our site. It just makes it easier for us to print them off and organize them all. So make sure you go and click that right there. And then as usual, I'll be doing the first half an hour of the show for free here on YouTube, and then I will continue answering more questions for our Vault members in the Sit and Vault version. Also, a link in the video description below to go to that. And if you're not a Vault member, you can click it, get a free 7-day trial, get instant access to everything, no limitations, and try out the Vault, which we hope that you will do. So let's just jump right into this. Remember, next week is Josh and Lee. Lord O'Bones. Hey Matt, I have a few questions. So it's happened again. You've begun the Age of Sigmar narrative campaign, and Games Workshop has brought out a new edition. Will this affect the campaign release schedule, or do you expect it to finish before the new edition drops sometime in June? I hope that'll be done before it drops. I don't know the date yet. They haven't announced the date yet of the release of Age of Sigmar 2nd edition. If it's like the first Saturday in June, it'll be hard to have this one done by then. And the problem is we're actually filming ahead, so like by the time you watch this Sit and Talk, we'll have already filmed the first 5 weeks, which does spill into like the second Saturday in June. So I'm hoping that 2nd edition will follow the pattern of the other ones, where you'll get an announcement sometime in June, and then 2 weeks later it'll come out, kind of how 8th edition happened last year. So I'm hoping for mid to late June for its release. It'll give us more time to get everything ready as well. Worst case scenario, let's say it has already come out, we might just have to put, I don't know, we might just have to put a little warning at the beginning saying, hey, this was filmed in 1st edition. It would be a shame if it was the wrong one, so I might just have it go out sooner, like have it go out on the Tuesday and the Saturday to have the whole thing come out before 2nd edition drops. That's most likely what I would do instead, is replace the Tuesday content with more narrative campaign so that it comes out twice a week and gets done twice as fast. That's most likely what I'd want to do. I don't think I want 1st edition Age of Sigmar to be out after the 2nd edition comes out, because everybody's going to be wanting to watch 2nd edition stuff, so I think it'll be a bit of a downer, even for a narrative campaign, which doesn't care as much about the edition, for people to come in and try to wrap their head around the fact that we're using old rules, but they want to see new rules. Secondly, by the time you answer this, Games Workshop will probably have released a few articles on the new edition. They have indeed. Have you had a chance to read any of them? Yes. If so, as someone who has just recently started playing Age of Sigmar, what do you think about the changes? I love them. I love that they're doing this. I'm glad that it's like an Age of Sigmar 1.5 more than it is like a 2.0, because I'm just learning it, and also because then they'd have to redo all the battle tomes again, and it feels like they're just finally getting those done. So like, for example, I'm glad this is like going from 6th to 7th edition 40k rather than 7th to 8th. I really liked 7th to 8th. I thought that it needed that change, but Age of Sigmar did not. And so I love, what have they announced so far? Let me think. They've talked about the command points and being able to use multiple command abilities. There's a lot of little changes. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to necessarily discuss each of them here. But there's a lot of little changes, and I'm loving everything I've seen so far. I especially love what they're showing for the new Night Haunts and the new Stormcast Eternals, because I think they look fantastic. I really want to have a really good studio Night Haunt army, so that'll be nice to have that here. Finally, will the release of the new edition push you to create a new campaign sooner than you had planned, or do you intend to first focus on other content for the new edition? I definitely want to do another narrative campaign pretty quickly after this one. We'll kind of see how everything works out, because there's going to be a lot of content to cover. For example, I am definitely going to be doing a How to Play Age of Sigmar 2nd edition series pretty shortly after the new edition drops. We're definitely going to want to do a bunch of reviews. We're going to want to have a ton of battle reports come out. We plan maybe for the first 1 or 2 weeks after after we're allowed to start posting content for it, that we almost every day post Age of Sigmar content. We'll still put out our 40k stuff as well, and our painting tutorials and all of that, but we'll have a lot of focus on Age of Sigmar for the first little while, kind of ride that wave of popularity. Probably do faction focuses, probably do a lot of discussion stuff. There's a lot of things we can do. There's no way that we're going to be able to cover everything, but that's fine. We never have been a channel that tries to cover everything. We just try to do what's fun and what is interesting. So, but I do hope to do another campaign shortly after that, and I already have an idea for it. I don't really want to talk about it here yet because it'll give away some certain things for the current campaign that's going on, but it'll definitely be in a different realm. Let's just put it that way. My hopes were for the next year, as I did Age of Sigmar narrative campaigns, that we'd kind of traverse the realms, and so we'd get to go through each of the realms, not just focus on the ones that are mostly fleshed out, but even go to the lesser fleshed ones, like the realm of shadows, realm of light, all that kind of realm of metal, the ones that just don't have as much in them, at least right now. And I'm trying to keep up on, I've been reading more novels for Age of Sigmar, currently reading Plague Garden, which is really good. It's long, but it's really good. Honestly, I got through the first half and I'm like, phew, cut it off right there. That would have been a great novel. But it keeps going, it has more story. It feels like the next story, to be honest. CAD Gaming. I actually have two questions for you. First, when it comes to making a narrative campaign, what would you say is the most important first step? Let me continue reading your comment. I want to make one for me and my friends to do, but don't really know where to start. That's a hard question to answer because the way that I'm making a narrative campaign for MiniWarGaming would probably be very different than how I'd make a narrative campaign for a group of friends. If I were doing it for a group of friends, I'd probably grab something like Age of Sigmar Firestorm, for example, if I was doing Age of Sigmar. Something that's like a map-based campaign with a looser story. It's more forgiving if players drop out or drop in. See, that's one of the things. Like, for our narrative campaigns, I am paying the players to be there, so I can have expectations that they show up and play, that their models are painted to a certain standard, that we play certain games, that I have a lot of control over those games. I don't have to feel bad for having that control because I'm paying them to be there. But if it was a friend, then it changes the dynamics. Like I've been a games master now for free groups, in other words, normal groups, the ones I've been doing all my life, and now I've games mastered for a group of employees. And it's a different experience. With the employees, I can kind of, when there's issues, I can talk to them and say, hey, you need to change and do this differently. Whereas with a group of friends, I need to adapt to them more than I would have to with employees because I can't just tell them, oh, you have to change. It's like, yeah, sure, you can still do that with friends, but you're just a bunch of friends getting together. It's a different level of authority, I guess. So when it comes to making narrative campaigns for MiniWarGaming, the most important thing to me is the idea for the story and the setting. That always comes first. I usually get most excited for that. The second thing that I then start working on is, do I need any custom rules for this? And over the years of making narrative campaigns, I've learned that often less is more. That in the past, I've gone all out and made tons and tons of custom rules. And sometimes that was necessary, like when we did Augustine's Wreckage narrative campaign, which was basically the Necromunda or Armageddon campaign that I borrowed from the Inquisimunda stuff, and I made a lot of really cool war bands out of that, and that allowed us to play this really unique setting. And I think that was good. It was like 20 to 30 pages of rules, though. But then like the Deathwatch narrative campaigns, which are our most popular, they only require like 3 or 4 pages of rules. Like basically, what do the chapter tactics do? How do the upgrades work, which is probably the biggest section, and a little bit of a death chart so you can track what happens to the ones that are taken out of action. And that's really all I need for rules. And so I can usually crack that out in a day and get all the rules done. But I'd say setting first, your idea for the story and the setting needs to be really interesting. And obviously you have to consider what your friends have. I consider what we have. Now, mind you, our resources have grown over the years since the very first narrative campaign that I made. I did Necrons versus Tyranids in our very first narrative campaign because that's all I could really do. Because Steve was the volunteer that I was able to get in to come in for that much time. And he had a Necron army. I actually didn't want to have it be Necrons because I wanted to do a Tyranid campaign. And I was like, well, I don't want to be Tyranid versus Necrons. That's bad guy versus bad guy, kind of. But then I'm like, okay, well, I'll make it work. And it turns out it was a really cool story, and I really enjoyed doing it, and it worked really well. And so being forced into what your players have is not necessarily a bad thing. So you can look at, do they have a Grey Knight army and he has a Demon's army? Well, obviously, let's do a narrative campaign that pits the Grey Knights against a demonic invasion of sorts. Or it could be something less subtle or more subtle than that. But that could work. So look at what you have access to, terrain and model-wise. Pick a really interesting setting based off of all of that and a story. See if you need to do any custom rules. You probably always need some. You usually want characters to have some sort of upgrades. You can, if you're using Age of Sigmar, there's a lot of stuff with the Path to Glory system already pre-made. If you're doing 40k, then you can kind of borrow ideas from like the Necromunda upgrades or things like that, where it's like, you know, you roll on a random table and he'll get +1 attack or +1 strength or +1 wound to certain maximums. You can make your own skill charts and all that if you really want to. You got to be careful though. Sometimes it can get carried away and get too powerful. But yeah, it's just something you have to consider. The big thing that you're going to have to consider, because you're doing it with your buddies, is most likely they won't be able to have as long an attention span for the narrative campaign as, say, my employees would, because I even have a hard time with the attention span, and I'm the one creating it. But if you're with a group of friends, you typically want to get it done in 4 to 6 weeks. Any longer than that, and they'll probably start to lose interest. If you know there's going to be a lot of, whoa, our power just went out, and it's coming back. Okay, so my camera is battery operated, so you can still hear me. So I'm just going to keep talking for a minute, even though I'm really thrown off. So if you know that there's going to be a lot of drop out and drop in, then creating a more flowy campaign, like a map-based one, might work better. And then that allows you, and then you just kind of plan for that. You plan for the fact that we can get new players. Then that can be a longer running one, 2 to 3 months is fine. And any longer than that, you don't really want to do. You want to be able to wrap it up and move on to something else. And I'm going to pause right here, see if I can find my remote. Okay, there's my phone. You see my phone? Let's see if I can find my, I found the remote. And okay, so we're over here now in the warehouse where there's a window. Power's out, we have no idea why. So I'm just going to keep answering questions, because really, do you need to be able to see me well? You don't. And everything else is battery powered, so the sound should be unaffected. So let's continue. So going back to CAD gaming, we were talking about narrative campaigns. Second, one of my buddies is looking to get into Warhammer 40K and can't decide which faction to choose. Which would you say is better, Necrons or Deathwatch? Those are his two top picks. Oh, that's a hard choice, because Necrons are probably easier to paint. But Deathwatch or Space Marines, those are not too hard to paint. Deathwatch is a newer army, so they're going to have maybe more bells and whistles. I don't know. Josh would probably be a better one to ask, but I play Necrons. I think if I were choosing right now, based on what I know, I would probably be more enthusiastic about Deathwatch. I think their background is more interesting, or at least the models are more interesting. The Necron ones they're all right. They're fine, but they're just an older line too. So I would choose Deathwatch. But honestly, I can't say which one's better. They're both pretty good in the game. So it really comes down to aesthetics, which one you like better. By the way, as I haven't yet decided if I'm going to be a Vault member, if you answer this question, can you do it in the free video? Thanks, CAD. Well, I can't guarantee it, but obviously I did. So you're welcome, CAD. And you are a Vault member now. It says you're a bronze member. So thank you for joining. Steel Eye. Hey, Matt. Hi. Love all the work you guys do. Thank you, Steel Eye. In light of what Chris said about 40K being oriented towards fighting and not so much diplomacy, how about making a Dark Heresy RPG campaign based around the beginnings of a Genestealer cult trying to establish a foothold and spread its influence? Well, Chris might say that, but a Dark Heresy narrative campaign can actually be a lot of fun with next to no fighting. I've done that before, and you do a lot more investigating and detective work. But unfortunately, the party kind of built themselves to be more of a fighting party. Not everybody did. But it ended up being probably more heavy-handed towards the fighting, which meant they were less subtle, which meant I just had to kind of give them more fighting stuff. And if I were going to want to do something more fighting-based, I don't think Dark Heresy would be the system I want to use. It gets a little clunky in the combat area. And really, if I wanted to focus on fighting, then I could just play the miniature tabletop game of Warhammer 40K or Necromunda or something like that. Whereas role-playing, I like it when it's based more on role-playing, interaction. Not saying that fighting, of course fighting is in role-playing. Look at D&D, look at all these different systems. It's a big part of it. I just think that Dark Heresy shines as an investigative game rather than a combat game. Players being cultists, obviously, actually playing as a cultist. Do you think it's doable, and would you consider doing it? It's totally doable. I probably wouldn't do it, though. I think it would potentially give a different perspective to the lore and pace of the game. Yeah, I know it'd be a lot of fun. We're not going to be doing another role-playing game for a little while. We've got to recover from the last one, but more importantly, we've got a busy summer ahead of us, so we'll see when we come back to that. Stately Wacko. Nice name. Hi, Matt. Love the content you guys are producing at the moment, and this new Age of Sigmar narrative campaign is fantastic. Thank you. Your delve back into fantasy is making me want to dust off my Beastman. Alas, new edition coming, I shall wait. So question. With all the new shiny pretty models being painted and armies looking amazing on camera, Do you look at your original Tyranids and think they can use some love? Yes and no. Paint scheme for sure on the models that I painted originally are pretty ugly, but I think the paint scheme on the rest of my neck on my Tyranids are fine. What you're seeing though is you're comparing new models versus old models, and this is why a lot of the Age of Sigmar stuff looks so much more fantastic, because it has a much newer model range. Now, yes, you can still use all the old fantasy, or a lot of the old fantasy stuff as well, so you can mix in the old with the new. Although it does get a new life breathed into them when you switch them over to circular bases. Like, seriously, well, obviously it's subjective, but I think that it kind of gives them a new look and makes them look better. But like when you look at the new Ideneth Deepkin, or the Fire Slayers, or the Caradron Overlords, or the Stormcast Eternals, or the new Daughters of Cain, or the new Maggotkin of Nurgle. Like, there's this all these things are newer models, whereas the Tyranids haven't had a new model for quite a long time. And on top of that, they've started being made at least 20 years ago, something like that. And so even as you make new models, you're still kind of carrying over this aesthetic. It's kind of like the Daughters of Cain. Never been a big fan of having an army or a war band of a bunch of women in skimpy outfits with a thong and a thing. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think it's something that we really need. It just kind of carries on that stereotype. And so when they come out with the new models for the Daughters of Cain, they got better, but you can see that they were still influenced by that old look. Whereas the Deepkin, which are also dark elves, kind of got a fresh start, and so they were able to be like, we're not going to have to carry over any of those old looks. We can just start brand new. And so I think you're comparing a lot of that stuff, which is hard, because the Tyranids, I was never a big fan of the way they looked. I've grown used to them, but I think that if I had control and money wasn't an issue and we weren't trying to worry about the bottom line for Games Workshop, I'd say ditch the entire Tyranid line and redo it from scratch. Make them much more animalistic, ditch the whole holding guns thing, have them spit stuff, have them have spikes coming out of them, have them all the organic stuff, more, for lack of a better comparison, more like the Zerg from StarCraft. And I think that aesthetic would just be dramatically awesome. And whereas the Tyranids right now they're okay. They're all right. I'm not a big fan of how they look. I don't like it, because I think that the problem is you have all these old models, and as you've made newer models, they still want to look like they belong with those older models, so they keep that older aesthetic and mix it in with newer, cooler looking aesthetic as well. And they haven't had new models for a little while. So that the Tyranids need love, but not painting-wise, but model-wise. But then so do a ton of other things, because the range is huge and has been around for a very long time. So I think that Age of Sigmar has a lot of promise, because they can kind of reboot each of those ranges. That yes, right now you can use your Empire and Bretonnia models and your Tomb Kings if you really wanted to, even as counts as for the Free Guild for Bretonnian Empire, or just as undead for the Tomb Kings. But I think that the promise of Age of Sigmar is that they can be like, we can kind of discard those old lines, because we don't need to keep the old heraldry of the Bretonnians, which I know some people don't like, but of course it will always create that kind of problem. We can create a new Free Guild. We can create this new human army and a completely new line of models. And you can mix in the old ones as well, but we don't have to hold on to the aesthetic of those old models. But like I said, as they showed with Daughters of Cain, they are still kind of holding on to the old aesthetic, so who knows what will happen. All right. CAD Gaming. Oh, you can ignore the request about making sure it's on YouTube. I decided to join the vault. Thank you. We actually randomize the questions. Like we take the top voted questions for the first few, but then a random after that. So it doesn't matter when you've left the comment, you still have a chance of getting yours answered. Kaylin, or Cayenne, what is your favorite model for 40K in Age of Sigmar? Well, Lee just finished painting up the Rogue Idol model from Forge World, which is a big rock monster for Age of Sigmar, and I think it's my new favorite model. It's kind of ridiculous, and it just looks like a big rock monster, but it's so fantastic in its scale and its coolness that I think it's one of my favorite models for Age of Sigmar. If I was looking more at a range of models for Age of Sigmar, I'd have to say the new Night Haunt stuff is probably at the top of my list, but I like the look of the undead. I like the look of the Disciples of Tzeentch. I think that's a cool looking army. I love all the new Khorne stuff, the new Nurgle stuff. The Stormcast stuff I actually like. I like a lot more than Space Marines, but it's not at the top of my list. For 40K, it's a little harder because, like I said before, I love 40K, but the aesthetics are not my favorite part of 40K. I've gotten used to the grimdark future. I've learned to love the lore, but the look of the models has never been something that's really drawn me in. Now the newer Thousand Suns models, I think those look fantastic. Yeah, it's usually their newer stuff that just more impresses me than the older stuff. Can't think of just one model in particular though. New to the, continuing for Cayenne, new to the Age of Sigmar lore, you got me into it with your learning of it. Well, thank you. Or you're welcome. Or sorry to your wallet. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. I'm glad to hear that I got you into it though, because that's what I want. I want tons of people to get into it because of us, so we can be that kind of influencer for good in this market. What is your favorite bit of lore for Age of Sigmar? Well, for me, I think it's come to be how the realms work. At first, that was my least favorite part of it because it was so ambiguous, but now that they've been defining it more, I love the aspect of how these realms work. To me, it's created this fantastic setting that has the potential to be anything from mundane to ridiculous high fantasy, from the struggles of the everyday person to the clash between gods. It creates that whole range, and that to me is fantastic because fantasy had some fantastic lore, but because you're confined to the one world and the one area, is that you found that it was harder to kind of carve out your own niche within it. As I make narrative campaigns, for example, in 40K, I like to find my own part of the galaxy and build. And you can find a little spot in the galaxy, and it has 10,000 worlds or 100,000 worlds, and that's just a little blip. And yet, when you delve into it, that is hugely epic. Age of Sigmar now is going to allow the same thing. Illarath's Awakening is a good example of that. We created our own subcontinent of Illarath, and that is nothing canon. There's nothing canon in there except for the fact that it's in the realm of life and it has realm gates and the armies that we're using. We made up our own cities, we made up our own locations, we made up our own background for it, and it's all fits in the realm of life. If you zoom out of the realm of life, the part that they've developed, that Games Workshop's developed, is very small. So we're just kind of developing a little area over here of our own that can still reference the stuff that they've built, but still have complete control over it. So I love that they've kind of increased the scale to that. It feels like I can do epic things without having to bother with the main lore, because I don't like messing with the main lore because Games Workshop updates that. And so if I do something and then they update it and it contradicts what I did, then it's hard to keep continuity. Draws 1973. Let's see how much time I have left. Okay, it's good, still have some time. You mentioned that you read some of the Age of Sigmar novels that inspired you to start playing the game. What was your favorite, and do you have any recommendations for someone who hasn't read any of them? I read City of Secrets first, and I would recommend that as your first one because it is short. And not a short story. It's not I don't even know if I'd call it a novelette, but it definitely was a quick read. And it had kind of that human as the main character kind of thing, but still introducing other races as well. And I thought that was really good. Spear of Shadows was fantastic. I loved it. So that's the second one I would read. That's the second one I did read. So I read Spear of Shadows, and that was more like your typical D&D, here's a party of different races, a human and an elf and a Durridin and a vampire all work together. And you get the perspective from the Skaven and from Khorne and from Tzeentch and from them. And I think that I thought it was fantastic as an introduction to understanding kind of how everything works together. And it was just a great story too. I also read Nagash, the Undying King, which is more set in the Age of Chaos, or the end of the Age of Chaos. And that one was really cool because it was all in the realm of death, and it was Nurgle versus death, but the death side was humans, like mortal humans that were, in side by side with death. And that one gave you a cool perspective on Nurgle and saw how the human aspect of them, and also gave you a better idea of what the realm of death was like, at least where they were talked about. So that one was fun. And it gave you a better understanding to the mind of Nagash as well. I'm currently reading Plague Garden, which I'm finding to be a little long, but everything I'm reading is really good. I'm just more wanting to hurry up and get done because I want to read more books. So I'm more in that stage of it, but I'm still very much loving the writing. Josh Reynolds has done a great job with that. And so I'm loving everything for it. I just kind of wish that it went faster so I could get to the next book, is more of my complaint there. It's like 600 pages, and I'm like a little over 300 pages through it. I'm 350 or 400 pages through it. And honestly, at the 300 page mark, I'm like, that could have been the end of the story, and that would have been a fantastic ending. But that one's really good too. I tried reading Overlords of the Iron Dragon, I think it was called. It's a Caradhran Overlord, Tzeentch one. I only got a couple chapters into that one, and I just wasn't interested to keep reading. It might have turned out to be a good one. Some books you just have to kind of push your way through. I might go back to that one. So those are the ones that I've read so far. And then I've I took a little break from novels after I read the first 3 and went through all the battle tomes. I read pretty much every battle tome and all of the lore part of them just to get, because a lot of the battle tomes will focus on whatever realm that they're from, and they give you a better idea of the setting. And so I spent a lot of time reading that too. But my recommendation would be City of Secrets first, followed by Spear of Shadows. Those 2 for sure, if you're just starting out. And it's funny because people recommended that to me. I read them, and then as I've looked around and people answering that same question, they seem to come up with those same 2 books. So it seems to be a common theme that those are ones that people recommend for starters. Keep up the awesome content, and can't wait to see the game played on Lee's new scenery project. Yeah, that'll be at least a couple months away, but thank you. Scott McCutcheon. Hey Matt, how would you feel about a narrative campaign where one of the 2 factions playing has a predetermined amount of models or units for the whole campaign? These models will be representing that player's army battle group for the duration of the campaign and would be non-replenishable. Each unit would have to be used sparingly, and if kept alive to the very end, would participate in a big apocalypse finale. What are your thoughts? Could you see yourself doing something like this in the future? I've been asked this question from time to time, and it's a really cool concept. I even thought I was going to use it for one of my campaigns a while back, the World Engine one. But then I realized logistics of it are really hard because it's hard to predict from the beginning how things are going to go. And so by not having this set amount of army, it gives me a lot more fudgeability when it comes to the story. And like, oh, they're not doing very well, so let's just bring in some allies and say that they're not doing well. Or we don't know how many more there are, so I don't have to worry about, oh, they ran out mid-campaign. And then the other question would be, I probably wouldn't just have it if a guy is removed from play in the game that he's dead. I'd probably have some sort of death table to keep track of it. It's a cool concept. I'd almost want to use it more in a more player versus player campaign, where you have 2 or 3 players, maybe 4 players, and they have this preset amount as they go through. Whether you just keep track of how many points they have and how many points they lose, or more specific units. It sounds really cool. The logistics of it would be hard, and the thing I'd be afraid of is that it wouldn't be interesting to watch. And what I mean by that is you think it'd be interesting to watch at first, which it probably would, but halfway through the campaign, when all of a sudden you have to look at the realistic fact that, you know, they've lost and we're kind of done, or there's just not too much, or they're just kind of barreling their way through this, and once you get that imbalance, things become a little less interesting to watch. So that's what I'd be worried about. But I'm not saying that I will never do it. I'm just saying that that's the considerations that I've had for it. Side note, are we ever going to see the Imperial Guard Knights and Marines from the Storms of Ixia campaign again? Love seeing Steve, Andy, and you play with Commissar Khrushchev, battling the biggest of Tyranids and Orcs, only to be brutally beaten and surviving to continue the fight in the next game. Love the content. Keep up the good work. You have seen some of them. You've seen the Marines. The Marines that showed up were the Sentinels of the Forge, so you saw those in another narrative campaign. You saw Ixia come back in the Wars on Apothis, but I don't know. I don't really answer that question. I don't really plan too far ahead with narrative campaigns because I'd like to kind of go with what is currently coming out or what is fun to do for us too. So it's hard to say exactly which stories I'm going to wrap up. I don't have some grand plan for all my characters and all my stories. I kind of let it happen more organically, which has the advantage of letting me do whatever I want and the disadvantage of not necessarily wrapping up every last story end or story arc. Okay, one more comment, because we only got a minute left for this half an hour, so I'm just going to stop my timer from going off. Big Mikey, hey Matt, hope your day and week is going well. Besides the power going out, it's been great. With Games Workshop announcing Titanicus later this year, is there a chance we will see a mini campaign with whatever missions are in the book, or maybe even a staff Titanicus campaign, provided there is appropriate time and whatnot? That is our plan. Now, we don't know much about what will be coming out. Like, we've followed just what you followed, so we can see some of the models and some of the terrain and all that. But we do plan on covering it. What extent we're going to cover it is still up in the air. I'd love to play a campaign for it. It just depends on what we're currently trying to cover. We have a limited amount of resources, limited staff, so we can only get so much done. I don't want to just rush out a little campaign. I'd rather do something really good. But you should expect to see at least some content from us for it. And I don't think it'll become a regular thing, unless we get surprised by it. But I do expect to make a campaign for it. That is my plan. Or even crazier, an epic Titanicus battle on Lee's super awesome epic 40k table. I don't know if the scale of that would work. I guess you could make any scale work if you really wanted to. Those are just bigger walls. Thanks for all the amazing content. Well, thank you, Big Mikey. That's all the time we have for our free sit and talk. So don't forget, Josh and Lee are doing next week. So if you want to leave questions for them, leave them in the comments below, unless you're watching on YouTube, in which case click the link below to go to our site and leave them there. And then for our Vault members, you can click the link below to go and watch me answer even more questions. I got a lot more to do right here. And I'll try to stick to only Vault members' questions, because otherwise you won't be able to see the answer to your question. If you're not a Vault member, you can still click the link, get a free 7-day trial, and try out the Vault, get instant access to that video, as well as thousands of others. It helps support us so that we can keep doing this, and maybe actually pay our hydro bill, our electricity bill, so we can get our lights turned back on. I don't think that's what happened, but you never know. Thanks for watching. Happy wargaming.